Hey everyone, good morning. My name is Stuart Rosemurgy, and I'm currently studying with Kathleen Amon and Shah Osha in their program Making and Writing Visual Culture. In this program, we learn to question how visual arts and theory interact to decode the ways we see the world. Through reading critical theory and closely examining artworks, we bridge the gap between the complex, lofty world of thought and the grounded, tangible world surrounding us. This grounding of the everyday seems a perfect place to introduce our lecturer today, Jessica Jackson Hutchins. Born in Chicago in 1971, she earned her bachelor's degree in art history from Oberlin College and her MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work is in the public collections of museums of modern art in New York and San Francisco and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And she's shown at the 55th Venice Biennial and the Whitney Biennial in 2010. Using found objects, newspaper clippings, worn clothes, ceramics, and furniture, her work employs multiple mediums to explore art's relationship to everyday objects. Her work comes across as messy, haphazard, and awkward, all in a way that feels extraordinarily human, because aren't we all a little messy, haphazard, and awkward ourselves? It's intimate, embodied with our shared interactions with the things we surround ourselves with. A ceramic piece makes an indent on a couch that reminds us of who may have sat there. A table with a lumpy, colorful structure and clunky handmade ceramic dishes reminds me of all the people converging, meeting around the table. Jessica's work feels communal, like a gathering point for all viewers, maybe like a temple for punks, weirdos, and misfits. Her show, Wrecked and Righteous, is currently on view at the Fry Museum in Seattle. I highly recommend making the trip to see it. I'm excited and honored to introduce Jessica Jackson Hutchins.
Hi, thank you, Stuart and Shaw. Stuart, that was really good introduction. Um, I mean, that is sort of what my work is about. Those are the values that I sought to embody from the get-go. And it's funny, like when you were talking, I was like, it's all so simple, really, but it's not simple to get there, and it's not simple. It wasn't simple for me anyway to make the objects sing in just that way. Um, and it was important to me from when I started first figuring out what my work was about, that it have all those components of humanity and communion. When I was in school, a lot of people were talking about what was, wanting to be in dialogue with the viewer. I don't know if everyone talks about that still, but what does that take? You know, um, it takes a lot to be in dialogue with a viewer, and it takes a lot, just like it takes a lot to be in true dialogue with one another. But one thing it occurred to me that it took was that the work not be overly polished and a demonstration of my skill and training or something to such a degree that it sort of shut people out. It also required that the work not be overly narrative or didactic. I find really didactic work to be a little condescending. So, like, I know war is bad or something, and I don't really need you to tell me that. So, it required for me to position the work sort of like just so that it both demonstrated labor, but it didn't thematize labor to the degree that weird, slippery accidents couldn't come in, or tender mistakes, or bits of humor. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to go ahead and share my slide talk. And also, I want to say though that the way I like to do lectures typically is, yay, where that it's a little bit more conversational, just like the work. So really, if you guys have questions or thoughts, or you just want something clarified, or go back to that last picture, or call bullshit, I'm like pretty tough. So please do go ahead and raise your hand or signal to Shaw, who will like kind of tech host that just to facilitate, so it's not so awkward of me pushing lots of buttons. So don't hesitate. You don't have to wait till the end. We can just talk about it. Okay.
Can I quickly just say you can
Please.
You can type it into the Q&A and I'll keep my eye out, or you can raise your hand and then speak it. You won't, your camera won't come on, but you can speak your voice. So
Great. I love that. Yeah, I have some things I can read, but I'm just going to start showing you some pictures. So, gosh, I'm not great at years, so that's okay. And I have a dog. But I started thinking about using my ceramics in performance, or at least gestures. Gosh, almost just like within the first 5 years of making ceramics. Because one reason I started making them is because I liked the practical use value, the ubiquity, and the fact that they've been with us since history began. I like just like the commonness of ceramics, and that they were for eating and drinking. They were for like things that we need to keep us alive. So the relationship to the body and the relationship to utility was just sort of primary in my use of them. I was always making these pots. And so making vessels to eat out of, the very, very first ceramic show I ever made it started as a social practice invitation. And this guy, Sam Gould from Red 76, invited me to do a social practice dinner. I had just moved to Portland. So I said, yes, of course. And I just started making ceramics. So people were doing memory dinners. That's what he asked us to do, memory dinners. And I did a lonely dinner. So I made vessels to eat out of that were associated, the foods were associated with like bad, abject times in my life. And I had people over to do that. So the very first ceramics, they were always about what ceramics could be for. And it was always a metaphor for how we need art like we need food. Like we need to be hearts and minds, sharing ourselves and finding ways to understand ourselves as much as we need anything to stay alive, because that's my experience. So, 10 years later, or whatever, many years later, I have now done like 4 or 5 of these performances where I've made pretty big objects, and I've had dancers and different kinds of performers pick up these heavy ceramic sculptures. They're filled with different kinds of food, and they feed each other, and they handle the ceramics both roughly and aggressively as they need to be, but with a degree of care, as one does handle fragile bodies, with the potential that they break, but maybe the intention that they won't. And they feed each other, and they move and communicate with each other through the objects. This documentation is from a show, the time I did this performance at Mass MoCA, which is in the, Western Massachusetts. And for this one, I used my daughter, Lottie. You can see her in the background. She's a cellist. When I did it at a few other places in New Mexico and at the gallery in New York that I showed at, I had a professional cellist, and that was great too. Lottie was particularly good because she has a little less reverence for the instrument and the rules, and maybe she's young and a little experimental. It was funny. It was like with these professional cellists, the cello, we were more worried about the cello than the art objects, because it's just like an orientation. They're very precious instruments, but theirs, of course, were really nice cellos. And it was a little harder for them to play out of tune or kind of let it fall apart a bit. And Lottie really went for it. It was really powerful. At the very end of the performance, she really detuned the whole thing, and it starts to almost look like an octopus as the strings go flying, much like the objects are starting to just fall apart at the seams. This one was called Restless Animal Kingdom. A lot of my work involves printing, and you'll see more and more of that. It's a way to get started. It's also a way for things to be involved with other things. So actually, just for fun, see how those pants say Restless Kingdom? I think the green writing And you can see the top says restless too. So they have words there also. I've always printed off of furniture. So I've carved into tables and pianos and whatnot. And I just found this giving a tour of my studio the other day. I hope you're not getting dizzy, but anyway, this is just an old chair we had in the studio. And I carved, what does it say? Restless animals into it. And that ended up printing down the leg of those pants. So it's just an old chair back. You saw that, right? In the small business. I'm waiting for somebody to tell me that it's not, that you can see me in the small window. Okay,
Yes.
good. Thank you. That was useful. Like you can actually see it even though it's small. Shaw, do you think?
I could, and I'm squinting all the time, so I'm assuming other people
Okay,
can.
good. Yeah, because I mean, it's kind of fun since we're in the studio and we're all together. Like I can show you guys stuff that's in here. And like this is another just a coffee table that I've used to print on clothes and stuff. This time it's yellow because the last print I did was yellow. So I carve into it with woodcut tools or power tools. And then I use it as, sometimes I just take a big router and cut out the center so there's a hole in it. But we use that. We use these templates to like print the clothes. And I brought a big box of the clothes and the dancers pick things out. And that's sort of what I've done for all of them now. That's what we do. Okay. There's Nami Yamamoto, like an amazing performance artist. She gets tied into this piece, but she manages to skivel out of it eventually. I did have to give them rules that they couldn't just separate from the objects and go and party. They had to stay connected to the objects. If they wanted to leave one object, they had to get into another one. They could switch objects. But like that, this is sort of semi-costume, semi-part of their body, had to stay part of it. This is another performance and documentation from New York. Some of the same dancers came to Boston. We only changed dancers. Amanda, who's the one closest to the cellist in the image, she was on the road with Trisha Brown Dance Company. So she didn't come, but Lauren, this woman, Lauren came, who is incredible. She joined us. There's Amanda. So the show starts, this one started with, I will tell you, maybe it's too hard. Well, okay, so you see, well, should I try to do all this? I'm just flipping back through it. This woman on the left on the floor with the blue collar, that piece sits on the big giant ceramic box that Lottie, the cellist, is sitting on there. So it starts with her taking that off and putting it on her neck. And then the cellist taking a seat on the box. And then from then on, she wears that collar. And then Amanda just moves and, water and coffee. I filled the vessels with just things I thought dancers liked, like hummus and carrots and lettuce and coffee, because I like the smell of coffee. There were cookies, because coffee and cookies. There was oatmeal because I like its malleability, and it's almost like clay or paper mache or something. You can make things out of it. So it was really textures, color. We had oranges because of the color. I experimented for this last one with Jello, different colored Jello, which looks like my stained glass. But it almost seemed a little bit fussy, and I liked just regular food. And I see that there's a question, and I'm happy to take it.
This is from Jocelyn, what kind of paint do you use to print onto the clothing?
Great question. Because that's why artists look at art 90% of the time, is to get ideas and figure out how to do things. So that's what you should be doing. I've tried a lot, because I started off making these giant prints off of my piano on paper, and there's been a process. I've used the wrong stuff, and it still turned out. It just turned out differently, like oil based, and then it just never dried, So now the best thing to use to print on clothes, it's not expensive, it's not a big deal. It's like either speedball acrylic printing ink, or you can get printing ink that's specifically for clothes. And it's just like a water-based, like acrylic thing. And you can wash them, and yeah, they stay on there. So one thing I really loved about this show in particular, this is the show at the Boesky Gallery. I did the show, I have to tell you this, I did the show on March 5th of 2020. It was nuts. So it was literally the day before COVID shut the world down. But it was the day before. So we were all up in each other's grill, feeding each other and being together, and nobody got COVID, actually, as far as I know. But it did, I mean, it stayed with me, like the beauty of that conviviality during this era of being afraid of each other's bodies. We left the stains on the walls, as you can see, like a coffee stain over there, but we didn't do it to excess. I mean, the gallery, the people had to work there and it couldn't stink too much. So they cleaned up some, but they left what was sort of aesthetically pleasing and possible. This piece on the right is called "And Then They Were Married." And that is a pretty complicated ceramic piece. You can't wear that. It's pretty fragile, but it was full of cookies and flowers. So it still had a kind of welcoming atmosphere. I made that at Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach Ceramic Studio, where I was invited to work. They have like 45 gigantic kilns. And this guy who ran the program, Tony Marsh, just would invite people he was interested in. And you pay your way and figure yourself out while you're there, but you just get to work in these great kilns and in this really cool atmosphere. Simone Lay was there when I was there, and lots of great artists. So this I made as one piece originally. Well, the pink box is a ceramic box, and then these two pieces fit together. And it's something I always want to do, right? Is like join things together that shouldn't be joined. And I did pull it off. Like, anyone who works in clay knows that this is an insane thing to do, because clay needs to shrink. So if you have really heavy things joined by really thin things, it's just, the chances are it's not going to work. And over the years of pushing clay to do things it shouldn't really do, I have learned methods to get it to work. That said, it still has to get put in a crate, and there's all kinds of different art handlers. And sometimes they don't make it because of those art handlers. I do not break my work on purpose. I don't think it's like cute and funny to break it. I really try to make it the way I want to make it, but they do break. And sometimes I even cry, but I have really and truly experienced it over and over and over, that those breaks are often really generative and make the work better, like really often. And in this case, I think that happened. It was the first piece that sold from the show, if that is any proof, which it isn't, or it is, whatever. But this was one piece. It broke in shipping. It was in New York. I was in New York. The show was opening in 5 days, whatever. I went to some fabric stores and I got this kind of stretchy nylonish fabric, because I wanted the fabric to contribute a kind of pushy pulley thing. Anyway, I just found the fabric. That's the fabric I wanted to use. I used a hot glue gun and knots, and I reconnected it. And I often find with my ceramics, I just really like them next to fabric, especially when you have two ceramics together, it's going to be grindy. And having that softness, that additional material, I just think often makes the object more interesting. Whether I do it because it broke and I have to, or I just add a sweatshirt underneath a ceramic that's sitting on another ceramic because it just looks better. And the color, it adds a color and another material, and it just makes it more complicated and beautiful, in my experience. This piece is called The Star. A lot of the things from my work, like using chairs as pedestals, is in here, but this is often when I use a chair as a pedestal, the thing is sitting on the chair, and like Stuart talked about, indenting the chair with your weight. This just happened. I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, with the sculptures and pedestals. It's always different. In this case, I think they were kind of made parallel and then came together. But I like the fact that I was taking the chair, which I've used as a pedestal actually to deformalize the object, right? To make it less apart from our space, which it is on a white pedestal, and more, part of us sitting on a chair like a body. But I formalized the chair in this way. And I just love it. I think it's funny. I love the shape of the bottom and that empty space, and how it's kind of a riff off a pedestal, but also just has a very practical function. And Missy, who was one of the performers, this woman here. Let's just show you where we really there's Missy. Missy and some of these dancers are so incredibly in command of their bodies, that she was able to carry a heavy ceramic and like stand on this pedestal, and like wave the fabric around like a flag. Okay, so this was just this complicated clay object that I made thinking about it always as sort of like a tool belt of different foods. The straps are made of like wire and foam, and again, a found sweatshirt, probably one of my old sweatshirts that was printed on from woodcuts in the studio, and then we made these straps. So guess what? Actually, we just did this performance with a different group of people at the Fry, and we had this rehearsal, and I said to Lou, are you sure that strap isn't going to break? Because it's been worn a lot, and it was sounding kind of like I was hearing, and they said, no, it's fine. It did break right away in the performance, and it was fine. They had an extra job. They struggled with it. That struggle told a different story and was cool. Question.
Another one from Jocelyn. How do you source the furniture? Do you have a collection in storage or in your studio, or furniture in waiting to become a pedestal?
Yeah, great question again. The furniture originally literally came out of my kitchen because I was just sitting in the kitchen a lot because I had just had a kid, or I was about to, or something. And I just, it comes out of curiosity, right? So I wasn't like, I need furniture. It was like, I was sitting at this table that had these amazing beveled edges. And I was like, this should be a print. This would be a cool print. Sorry, husband, I really want this table. I guess I'd better find you a new one before I take it. And then it was like, wow, that piano is out of tune. The piano that's right over there. And that's a really beautiful outline, and I should use that. But let's make sure it can't be fixed so I don't feel too guilty. And let's even make sure the School of the Blind doesn't want it, or nobody wanted it. Great. I get to cut into it and turn it into a print. And so it came out of the objects around me. Then people start giving you things because they're crazy, and you're in this dialogue with people because your work is in public, or your collaborators or friends know about it. And I've had friends send me like this massive picnic table from Minneapolis. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this? Well, it became the basis of a whole bunch of prints and paintings based on that. And I'm glad you asked. I'm going to just read this to you. This was my very first artist statement in graduate school. I worked really hard on it, so don't be intimidated. I mean, I worked really hard on it, and I've used it to this day. And I really recommend, if you can really write and get clear and write a bang up statement, it can pay off. And don't bullshit it and don't phone it in, because then it's worthless, But if you make it true, it can be helpful. So this is graduate school. I make my work out of the stuff in the room. So the furniture was in the room. Banal things, kids' old clothes, cast off furniture, bits of cultural detritus, or fragments of found or my own made ceramics contain evidence of a past, signs of aging, imperfection, and falling into dereliction. I want my sculptures to contain a sense of priorness that suggests that the emotional or narrative content of the work is already there in the materials in the world. So this way, the work becomes about a shared activity of recognition, so that the feelings, it's all there, and all I'm doing is framing it, right? I'm just tweaking it, and then we see together how funny it is that everything points back to our own wretchedness or loveliness, which is the same thing maybe. As the objects are transformed, they gain significance beyond the literalness of their materials, that it's just a ceramic thing. And the act of making meaning is itself made subject. My work should be useful within a process of reading and evidence of trying to read in articulation. Maybe that sounds fancy, but it should both be, it's kind of like it is reflecting the process of reading that we're making meaning, and it's also about that process. So it's also a little bit meta all the time. There was a question, but it disappeared. But if you want to ask it, you are welcome to.
I think it maybe was the same one.
Okay. There's another paragraph, but I don't feel like reading so much unless somebody asks me to later. So that's that piece I was showing you. That box is like an 800. It's very fat because I just made a really fat, heavy ceramic box. Partially because because I was at Long Beach and they had those crazy ass kilns and I wanted to push it because I had the means to. And then the collar that you saw being worn is on top. And I just, that collar is not in the show at the Fry, but I dragged it there for the performance because I wanted it in the show. So I don't know, just to say things can have different ways of being. This is called Bright Bellows. And you saw Missy wearing that. So I do like the fact that these are worn and they're messed up and they're part of this performance, but then they also can act as contemplative sculptures. And I believe they have value as these contemplative sculptures. And I also can feel whatever entropy or mess or that happens, or just aura that happens from having been in a performance. I feel like it sort of aggregates around the thing and makes it more beautiful. So I like that, adding that history. Sure, if somebody buys it and it goes in a museum and they don't want it messed with anymore, that's okay with me. Then it's like archived. But if it's in my studio still and there's an opportunity to reinterpret it, I'm just going to keep doing that until it's kind of becomes more dormant and has this other kind of life. Just to say, I like all the different kinds of lives that objects can have, that sculptures can have. I do a bit of upholstery stuff. You can see in that detail, just because I took the back off the chair because it was limiting the way I wanted the object to, and I'll make the pedestal for one thing very often and it won't work. And then it'll sit around the studio sometimes for years and years before it gets used again. So this is called, I think it's called World's End because of the tartan upholstery. I named it after Vivienne Westwood's first shop with Malcolm McLaren. So I like that punk reference, but also it was tartan. So I added spray paint to it just to mess with it. I actually don't know if it needed it or not, but I just did it. I like the way the thing apes a body and also suggests all these different uses. What else can I say? I made that here in my studio with my kiln. It didn't need a very special kiln really because it's not terribly big and it was made in pieces. I covered it with a kind of a slip and carved into it. You can't even see close enough, but I think that's called sgraffito, which is a really beautiful way to draw on ceramics. My friend Jennifer Rockland does that. She makes a pot with like red clay, covers it with slip and carves drawing into it. So it's really more about the drawing on the surface. There's a question.
This is from Sarah. How do you calculate how much strain you can put on pieces when mixing in rope textiles, like on that piece?
So you're kind of asking like, how do you know if it's going to work? Because you're, now that basin is like hanging off the other sculpture and it's going to stretch the leather. And I don't do tests like that. Not really. I mean, we'll practice with it a little bit, but just by using it, I'm not, I really just like to mess with things. I don't know. I really just like it to be intuitive and playful, and we just keep trying. So if I use that leather thing and, I'd hold it on the back, or I'd have a friend or my assistant hold it and we might fill it with water and just see how heavy and, just common sense. And like I said, sometimes it breaks eventually, or I'm surprised that it holds for so long, so well. So we try to have common sense is basically it. This piece, so this is also an answer. This piece was based on this one. So this one I made, this is my old studio in Berlin, like 2012. And I made this one, I guess I made it and then it was included in the Venice Biennale, and it was included in a show I did in a museum in England and in Switzerland. So just to say, the piece did travel a bit, but we forgot to consider, and I wish my gallery had at the time, that the Venice installers are kind of notorious deinstallers. So when they deinstalled the piece, they broke it. And actually, SF MoMA was going to buy it. They had already like made plans to buy it, and then they broke it, and so they didn't want it anymore. Oh, boo-hoo. But it came back to the studio, and years later, I really did always want a human being to interact with this, but I got carried away with the materials, and so they couldn't. And it is beautiful that it does that. I do believe that that is beautiful technically. I think that the shape is beautiful. I kind of wish it hadn't ever fallen apart, been broken. And it didn't have to be broken. That's what I'm telling you. We shipped it and it was okay. But when it was, I mean, that is beautiful. And it did change. So when it was broken, we drilled, I don't know if I have a picture of it, silly me, but we drilled holes in it because it was broken, and we attached it broke right where you'd expect it to break, on the edge of that chair where it's the most fragile. And we drilled holes in it and covered the break with fabric, so it just looked a little bit more seamless. And also because I don't like that pink, I just don't really like the pink color of bisqueware. So we covered it with fabric, and it's been used in multiple performances. And I'm weird enough that I can't even remember if it's in the Fry show, but I think it is. Yeah. This is a piece called Sap. That piece of furniture I found. It was just outside my door at my studio in Berlin. And it had this graffiti on it that said Sap. And I don't actually like that title, but I just used it because that's what it was on it anyway. Because I think it's so beautiful. It should have a prettier name. So now this I've shown a few times, few museums. It's still mine. For the Fry show, I realized I wanted it in the performance. I liked the way Lou worked with it. I was tired of the couch. So it's in the Fry show hanging off the wall. And we made this sort of like, almost like you'd hang a saddle for a horse. We made the installer did a great job, but it wasn't that hard for him. It's just a simple kind of like wooden stand, so it can be held in two places, and it hangs on the wall. And so actually Taka put it on first. So when Taka went to put it on, he kind of slithered underneath it and put it on, and that was great. This was one of the earliest ones I made for people to wear. You wear it so straightforwardly that I've almost gotten bored of using it in performances, and I like the ones that are a little bit harder to interpret. But it was an early one, and it's called Red Wine and Deviled Eggs, because that's what I first imagined would be in it, but no institution has let me use red wine because it stains. The chair is full of bullets, the front, in order to weigh it down, because as you can imagine, like when a kid tips back in the chair, it could fall. The chair is kind of diminutive, and I really kind of like that scale. I like it. Oh, and this is a woman. This was a performance at NMSU, New Mexico State University Museum. She's wearing that. There is a question.
Yep. Is the installation of a new show like a collaboration? This is Jocelyn.
Oh, isn't that nice? I was sort of talking to somebody about that. God, who was I talking to? Anyway, yes, it should be. It should be. I just believe from a lot of experience, I'm pretty old, I've been doing this my whole life, that when you soften up and you allow things to change and you take in ideas and possibilities as you go, that things get better, that they just get more interesting. It's just better that way. It's not, that's all. So yeah, it is kind of, for sure with the curator, anyway, for sure with the curator, who practically tricked me into making this show be such a, almost like a survey show, when I thought it was going to be more, artists, we always just want to make the new thing. And she had to sort of cajole me into like, no, we want to use the show to frame certain concepts. And then by showing work from my graduate school era, it ends up covering like 30 years. And it was extremely moving to me that way. But that was very much a collaboration. So yeah. And this is again at MSU, and the way this was in a group show, these three were students, dance students. They had this really sweet, cozy relationship with each other. Now you can see Lascaux, the piece that was in Venice, how it was fixed, which you could have guessed anyway, but it's better to see it always. And because it was so crazy to do this in a group show, right? But I was game. And what we did was we put this piece of carpet down, which I had to get used to. I didn't like it at first, but it was softer for their bodies, which was nice. And then they kind of had to stay within that frame to not mess up the art around them, right? Because if it's my show, we can throw it on the walls, but we didn't. And that was also lovely. And I felt like they stayed really connected to each other and more static. And I thought this woman on the left really seemed like Samuel Beckett, like a Samuel Beckett play. You know how he often has characters like that can't move, that are like deprived of their legs, or are living in a garbage can, or who are buried in sand up to their neck, which is so comic and existential and beautiful. So I felt like she embodied some of that. And she was sort of like the mama. They would like come over to her because she couldn't move. So like depriving them of all freedoms of dynamism and movement, condense the piece into a space. To me, it always looked like Lackawanna, this sculpture, which I've been looking at my whole life. I think it's because it's incredible. And it just generated more meaning for the piece. And there are two questions.
Yeah, so the first one comes sort of right after the collaboration question from August. How much of your creative process is intuitive and how much is intentional? And then the second one has to do with dialogue with the viewer.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to answer that, but that's The Lonely Dinner. I'm sorry, I don't always know what slides are in here, which is fine too, because I can sort of talk about anything. That's the Lonely Dinner. Those are the sculptures, the first ceramics I made. I don't know, I'm excited because they're so old. Okay, so it's very intuitive, you know, because I used to say, and it sounds flippant, but like I don't believe in ideas. I don't like ideas. I don't almost think they exist. That can sound kind of dumb because, of course, there's a lot of ideas in my work. But as an illustration, like let's say you're talking to your friend or you have an idea about an essay you're going to write, or you have to write an artist statement for an application and you're like, it's coming. And then you sit down to write it and it just is totally dumb or it's not even there anymore. So to me, that's an indication of the vast difference between a kind of thought and bringing something into form. So yes, I'll have an idea. It's a spark. I just try not to linger with it too much before I get to the materials. And then I try in the same way that I dialogue with viewers, people, voices, collaborate with human bodies or random occurrences or the news on the radio. I just try to stay open like a raw nerve to what can happen with the materials, what other people bring in. And I have worked, and it is a very strong intention that I allow that to inform the work. And that has to be a pretty strong intention. And it also involves a lot of practice. I think it doesn't mean you can't practice it today. It just means that it's always refined, you know, like how much that happens. And it's not always the case because sometimes you're just alone and you're tired and but honestly, even when you're alone and you're tired and you're playing with the clay doesn't want to do something. Sometimes you push it and you make it become a box. Clay does not want to be a box, right? You need that pink box to go underneath that piece I showed you, one of the early pieces. You need it to be a box and you need it to be a certain size. So you kind of push it. But other times, you know, I mean, it's just like making a painting. You think the red's going to do something. You put the red down. Oh my God, it did something totally different. And isn't that like really the joy and how we're always learning? And if that doesn't happen to you, I would say you're not paying enough attention, because the truth is the idea of putting red on a canvas and putting red on a canvas, there's a really big difference. So this is the first body of work of ceramics that I showed. It started with that one on the right, which was something mountain and Yoo-hoo cup. I sold it for like $2,000 to my friend Josiah McElhaney, who's a pretty well-known glass artist and remains a friend to this day. And he sometimes writes me about how it informs him on the daily, which is my experience with art. More proof, if you need it, that art changes the world. The one that's closest to us, the little black one, is French bread pizza coffin on a fence. The yellow flowers is just, it was like a decoration on an old piece of stationery that I cut out. So it's paper. And if you ever had Stouffer's French bread pizza, which I lived on in high school for a while, it's flat on one end and round on the other. So that piece cracks me up. I drank Yoo-hoo when I was like doing a lot of drugs, which I don't do anymore at all. So I'm not pro-drug, but I don't know why I said that, just because I know I'm talking to young students. But I also wanted to say it because I wanted to just suggest, like when I was talking about the darkness, it's also like a gross thing to drink. So it's not artisanal kale. The one, it's hard for me to point at it, but the one that's like white with the little and squat, that's like directly behind the black pizza coffin, what's called Monkey Mountain cereal bowl. So I don't know, I still sort of drink, eat cereal when I can't sleep. And to me, it's sort of like, I'm not eating dinner, I'm just going to have the cereal. So there's a bit of neglect to that. But the mountain was, some of these are landforms were derived from mountains that I saw in the window, that I climbed, that I interacted with, that I felt in different ways. Maybe I looked for the Yoo-hoo shot cup. Maybe I looked at that mountain online too. But this was, my friend who's an artist named Dan Torup, he's a photographer. He was doing research on the elevation of this mountain. And I used that image and tried to really like make it based on that. So different kinds of sort of collaboration or people reaching out. We're about to get into the glass work. So are there questions right now?
Yeah, there was one. Tom's kind of, I don't know if I got the whole thing. It had to do with the relationship to the viewer, but I think there was a second part of it that I don't remember. So if Tom, you want to bring it back up. And then Pepito is asking, is there any line you will not cross when it comes to following your own intuition?
I mean, I don't think cruelty is interesting or beautiful. I just don't think it is. I really like that book Maggie Nelson wrote called The Art of Cruelty. I'd recommend that. I like how instinctive it is. It's kind of like, sure, you can say all this stuff, but really, is it cool? Really, did that cruelty do anything? Let's ask ourselves that. And that's how I read theory and stuff too. I'm like, okay, but now let's think about how that might work. And so I would say, yeah, I really do like to the best of my ability, and I definitely make mistakes. I like to be kind and like allow people's voices to unfold. Like when I'm working with people, that's really hard, and when there's pressure and stuff like that. So, but now with objects or something, not really. I really want the objects to be beautiful in a way that I think is beautiful, and I can define that and I can talk about that. So if it doesn't have aesthetic interest or something, I'm not going to take it on. But there's no line for the line's sake that I've thought of that I wouldn't cross. No, I don't think so.
That's a nice answer, Fast. All right. Then Armand is asking. So we've got Tom's question back up, which goes back to performance before we get to glass. And that has the dialogue with the viewer change since shifting to performance. And then Armani's question might be a good segue into the glass. And we'll do that next.
Okay, so that's really good question. And I don't even know if I'm good enough to answer it yet. So So the last performance I did at the Fry was so cool, because these performers are called, they're called physical education, as a group, and they've really thought about performance in interesting ways, and they've done performance in museums and in performance spaces. And in our Q&A afterwards, we were talking about the difference between museums and performance spaces. And they have so much experience. They were way more than me, so smart about it. And one thing that Taka said was that in museums, people really treat you more like an object, and the object and the other sculptures and stuff are the most important things. And in performance spaces, it's really different than that. And they're really used to thinking about the people. And now that sounds like a bad thing. They treat you like an object, but Taka has done performances in museums. He's very interested in that. And I think it can be interesting too, but there's a lot to unpack there and get involved in. When you have people live in the room, it does change, and it's exciting. And like even looking at the documentation of some of my work, like my favorite documentation to watch is when you can see the people coming in and out. Also, man, I did this performance more than once where it wasn't like you sit down and watch it, right? You come in and out like in a museum. At the Fry, we sat down and watched it. So then you're talking about duration. It's just a lot, and it's really interesting. So, and they're right there. And then really at the Fry afterwards, and we got to talk with each other. So I had a dialogue with the viewers, and so did the dancers. And so that was beautiful. So it's changing, and I don't have a lot of whatever known statements. It's still evolving that. Yes. And there was a question to lead into the glass, maybe?
Yeah, I think sort of. How often do you do a sketch before you start working with your material, or do you just go for it? So
Yep, I'm more of a go for it. I try to sketch. My joke is that all my sketches look exactly the same because it's like I will sit down to sketch, and very quickly I'll start playing with the materials like it's a joke. And that can be hard for, I'm going to turn off this heater. That can be hard for applications and public projects sometimes, because they really want to know. And I've just been lucky, or I've been able to kind of phone in sketches and then just tell them this is just the idea, this is how it works, but it's probably not going to look this way. And now I have a portfolio of times that it's worked, so people have faith. But look at this, is a crazy piece. It is huge. So this was one I did for the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this curator, Eric Crosby, saw my show at Boski, which you'll see some pictures of. And he said, I have this idea. I'm doing a group show about economic inequality and working conditions. And I really think I see that address in your work, and I would love you to do a glass work in our ceiling. So I went out and I looked at their ceiling, which I keep looking around as if I have a map still on the wall of it, which I don't really. Sometimes that's easy to see, or helps you understand the scale kind of. But I can tell you that each one of these panels, there's 23 of them. The two on the end are only 8 inches wide. They're really skinny, but they're about 7 feet long. And all the other panels are 2 feet wide, if that makes sense. So, and then actually, I initially intended to make them all not all, actually, even from the beginning, I didn't want them all to be single 7-foot panels. Even from the beginning, I figured I wanted to interrupt some or change the composition that I was working on, or I'd get totally bored. But in the end, we did it all during COVID. So I couldn't make it outside of my studio. I had to make it in my studio, and my kiln, and I might as well show you because I think this helps understand the size of things. That's my kiln, my glass kiln. So it's about 5 feet long. It's kind of like a coffin. So it's about 5 feet long. So I couldn't make 7 feet long panels. In the end, I'm so glad, because I do care that it's safe. And it's just really sketchy it's a lot more sketchy. It was so easy. These guys put like aside a week to install it, and I'm always very proud when my work isn't a pain in the ass. It only took a day to install it. It was really easy, and it's much easier to handle a panel of glass that's 5 feet than 7. It's just a lot. It's not that many more feet, but it's just a lot more fragile. So this is about, and you can see my hand on it. This is about the size of the biggest panels that, and you can tell by the lines, right? Like where the breaks are. Anyway, that's a lot to describe the piece. I wanted it, when I've been making this glass, I've wanted it to be the one I did for Boski, which was a really big one, and this one. I wanted it to be both, this one more than Boski, accountable to the composition and also varied and changing and almost graphic novel-like at times, meaning that it suggests narrative, that it doesn't have to be consistent from panel to panel, because I really don't love design, how designy art can get. And I just, glass in a ceiling could really get designy. And I just really didn't want it to be that way. So, you can see there's like narrative things, there's sometimes figuration. There were stories about the protests because I was really involved in them. And how can you not want that to bleed into what you're making, right? Especially when it's about income inequality. I did the COVID curve. I don't know if I have a detail of that. And it is hard because I never got enough details and whatever. But, one of these panels has that COVID curve from the very, very beginning of this. There are panels, those are cops, from the protests. There's people throwing Molotovs. There are students working. There are people feeding people. It's very abstract, though. There's a water bottle and flowers. So there's moments of quiet and beauty, I think, and abstraction. And then there's bits of abstracted narrative. One funny thing, and I don't know. Maybe I won't even tell you about it because I don't have enough pictures. There's a question. And this was a show. And how do I charge myself before I go to the studio? I don't know if I do. I mean, I eat fine and I sleep well. I don't have problems with that, luckily. I love my studio so much. And the things that would hold me back from making were thinking, you guys, that I had to have ideas sorted out, and I had to know the reasons, and I had to know everything about what my work was doing. And I hope that just in me saying that, you see the absurdity of it. But we do that as artists, and it's not helpful because it's too much, right? We want our work to do so much in the world that you have to let go of a lot of knowing those answers. And if you think you have to have those answers before you start, not only will you never start, but the answers will be boring, totally boring, right? They'll be so simple and dogmatic or something. It's not what you want. So it's kind of like a back and forth, right? Knowing what you want and also letting go of it all the time and letting the objects do things you didn't expect them to. But like, you have to start on something. So sure, this one in the front, I had an idea for that one. I made a lot of my early ceramics. I would just take a newspaper picture, often of football players, and like abstract it by just coloring it in, and then make a ceramic based on that. So it was quite figurative abstraction, right? Because I'm taking 2D into 3D, but I liked, especially with American football players, how like the 3 bodies, it's usually 3 bodies, like coming together would kind of look like the 3 graces. So I liked, the art historical 3 graces. So I made a lot of 3 graces based on those. So I just wanted to do that, but really directly about like love and sex. And so I just took The Officer and a Gentleman. You guys don't maybe know that movie, but it was like an early sex scene I remembered from being a kid. And I printed out a picture and abstracted it and made this like couple. And it definitely has a sweetness and a clumsiness and it has a lot of the qualities that I want. And it was me putting that sculpture on different pedestals and the overturned chair and all the stuff, and it wasn't right. It wasn't right. And I think it was, in conversation with my art dealer, maybe Amy Adams, who works in Portland, who was like, let's put the cushion on the floor, and that was the thing that worked. The piece in back was made, while I was making these glass panels, which were made similarly to the ones for the Carnegie, but this was a show of before that, and it was the first glass show I ever made. And I had a residency at Bullseye, and I think they expected me to do like one, and I was like, well, I have 80 feet to fill, because I wanted it to be, I was lucky because I've always really liked marginalia, like the margins in manuscripts. I studied those as an art historian, and I loved how this room, oh, we're not going back to the room. I thought we were going back to the room. I loved how the room was framed by this glass, and the gallery didn't even know it was there. The other gallery, they have 2 galleries, and the other one had like a central skylight, and I just didn't want it. So my inclination is often to do the space on the peripheral and spaces that are a little bit odd, or I couldn't believe how perfect that space was. What a stroke of luck. And this was my first time in glass, right? Making it with my hands, rather than once I did a stained glass one where I drew it out and they did it. So I really didn't want, plus I think it's boring. Maybe I'm wrong sometimes. Maybe a little bit more skill and polish and individual panels would be great. But I do that sometimes too. So this was like, each panel was quite different. It was influenced by the news on the radio. It was influenced by breaking a piece of glass into a shape that looked like a hand or a leg. The new colors I wanted to experiment with. Hey, wait a minute, this is nice. You see the one, there's the self-portrait on the left. Then there's this one that's sort of, you see the leg and a sort of a ladder and a figure with a necklace on, kind of, the one with the yellow and purple. Well, then you go up and you see that kind of strange line. I thought this might be helpful because that's actually the piece of glass that I was just touching. So you can see how different it is in the ceiling with the light. And also we have the extra remove of having it documented, but that's this piece of glass right there. Now, can you see that there is depth to it so that it is not perfectly flat? That's very cool looking, and it adds a lot, and it's quite simple to do. So I made the glass flat. That is, I cut the glass. It's almost like doing collage. I cut the glass into different pieces and just put them together in like an image and fuse it together. And there's all kinds of stuff you can do with texture, and different kinds of frit. All kinds of things that you can do. You can also crumple up kiln paper and stick it underneath the glass, put the glass on top like it's sort of teetering on it, and then reheat it, and the glass will just melt around it. So that's how I got these kind of like lumps, and I get this sort of like bodily thing coming out. Yeah, I think that is probably, there's some value in that. Here's maybe another moment where you can see it doing that. This red moment here has depth. Also, you can use frit. The frit is broken up powdered glass, and you can sprinkle it on just for color, but you can also fire it at a different temperature so that it really sits on top and actually has real texture. And all of those formal experimental moves, well, I wanted to let them keep unfolding, right? And if I had just planned from the beginning exactly what it would be, I wouldn't have been able to do that. For the Carnegie, which was the next piece, I did that a little more because I was more experienced. Cool. So these are details of that installation. And in the Fry show, I did a window for them too. That was really cool. So this is something I'm doing more and more. And always experimenting with how I want them to operate. It's always really different. The Carnegie did acquire that piece. And the glass was sort of light for that, meaning it wasn't, well, like actually you can see in the fist, right? That's a light colored glass. So when the sunlight comes through it, it kind of washes it out. So it's a trade-off, right? And the glass for the Carnegie was intentionally a little bit lighter because they wanted to be able to show those things on freestanding structures inside the gallery too. And so now they've built little structures and they're just showing part of it at a time, which I think is really cool. I'm so unaware of time. Are we fine?
It's 12:35, so we're in the last half hour, and so
Okay.
however
And
we
how
want.
do you think, Shaw, it's working with me in having people interrupt with questions? I like it.
I think it's going great. I would love it if more people, raise hands and actually speak. It's always nice to have your voice in the room, but yeah, it's working. So if you all keep interacting with us, we can keep doing it in this format. It's fine with me.
Good. Because I just get, I can talk about anything and I get sort of bored of my own self. And you guys can help steer the conversation to what you want to hear about. So this was in that show, right? The same show. Maybe I shouldn't scroll so fast, but there it is. That's called Daughter. Yeah, I don't know. I like the way that word sounds, and it was that Minimet, that Meat Puppets. That Meat Puppets song that has that lyric that just says daughter in it and sounds so great. That's why I titled it Daughter. If you care. Some more details of this piece. That piece, Cushion, it's called Cushion, and that is in the fry. This is not. So, yep, I was also experimenting with bringing the glass out of the ceiling into the room, both because I was curious about exploiting or pushing its possibilities, right? Also because the glass was sort of far away and I wanted the viewers to be able to really see it up close and then make the translation of what it must be like up there. It just brought it into the room more. This has some cool frit action, and gosh, I even used silver foil on reactive glass, which made it turn into that kind of peachy, fleshy color. There's a balance of like really, really transparent moments with opaque glass, which blocks the light more, which is opaque. And that's the back. And I just got a steel worker to make this stand for it. And then as a bridge into the room, I made a ceramic kind of stand to go around the bottom, just because I wanted to connect it to the floor, almost like feet do. I honestly, when I'm looking at it, I'm like, maybe it would be better without that. I really have never thought that until this moment. But one more thing about the clay, and then we'll get to this question. I often, make prints, as I've talked about. I also take the clay and I push it into things. So the bottom of this, I've pushed the clay into cassette tape containers. And this picnic table I already mentioned to get a texture on it. And just because I can, since we're all together and best friends now, here is a vessel I made in the corner of your screen where I took the clay and I pushed it into that same table. And so it's got all of this, it's got these all these bumps from that. And that makes the glaze do beautiful things, and it gives it this like texture. Wait, gosh darn it, sorry. Gives it this texture. And you can see that on the bottom of that stand. 2 questions. Let's have at them.
Okay, we've got, we'll do, Kathleen and LaSalle are 2 hands raised, and then we'll move to the Q&A one. So Kathleen, you want to go first?
Yeah. Hi, Jessica. Thanks so much for this is super fun. It's a great way to see your work. I also saw the show at the Fry. Amazing. And when I was there, I was thinking a lot about Rauschenberg, like some of the more vertical pieces that integrate sort of paint and ceramic and I think furniture pieces. I'm trying to remember.
Sure.
It just made me curious. We've also been looking at Rauschenberg in our program. Like, are there art historical references for you, like movements that are super important, specific, like predecessors? Are there ways you situate yourself? Like, how do you think about your work? I mean, like, I was just going to say, actually, with each piece, I feel like I could conjure like a ton of other references. It just happened to be the one that stuck with me. So yeah, I just wanted to ask that question. Thanks.
Oh, super excellent question. I think about art history all the time. And it's funny. What's funny is that I was just, well, obviously I've been at the Fry a lot. I was standing in front of one of my own works at the Fry talking about this and talking about how there's like, Rauschenberg is such an obvious reference and it's right on, but I never really felt such a kinship to Rauschenberg, and I really should get more articulate about that. I was just saying that. And I actually did a show at the Aldrich Museum in like just outside of New York City, like Connecticut, or maybe it's still New York, maybe it's still New York State, specifically in reference to Rauschenberg. Anyway, it's a really interesting question because there's such obvious connection, and actually there's all the famous Rauschenbergs, but when I went to his retrospective, in so many of the work, I felt a kinship. But at the same time, there's a way I feel like it's really different, and that there's a way that I don't relate. And I guess that would be, oh, what would I think? Sometimes I feel like, for me, the life of the objects, what the objects are, the plate, the plant hanger, the eye from a magazine, or like the content of all of that stuff in like almost like a literary way is important to me and handled really kind of carefully to me, or precisely. I feel like there's a precision, maybe hopefully you can see it sometimes. And with Rauschenberg, it feels like their formal potential like completely overrides any of that. And it's really about formal and painting and stuff like that. Anyway, that's one difference. But it's a really interesting question. And so much art influences me all the time. I don't know, Cy Twombly was the first artist that I felt really hard in love with when I was in high school. That just is the first thing that came to mind. Medieval art, I really studied medieval art and showed a lot of like Christian imagery. I also love like word made flesh, like that whole concept and the way it's depicted, like, because I kind of feel like that's what I'm doing. Like thought, although hopefully it's not too clear articulation of a thought, but thought becoming thing that you can feel with your body and that offers kind of a different relationship to thought, like a fleshy thought instead of like a verbal thought. So I get that from a lot of artistic interpretations of Christian doctrine. Some of my favorite objects ever are these 14th century Buddhas. Now I don't, because I said Christian, now I'm thinking of religion, but these canons that I don't know, just the simplicity of the figure and also the extravagance of the gesture and stuff in them. Anyway, there's lots of art. And, I'll tell you now, in the last year, I've been invited to do etchings at the studio here. And I'm obsessed with that. That's all. So now I go to museums. If there's an etching show, I run, don't walk to the etching show. At the Hammer, there's one I just saw. And I'm just obsessed with looking at etching. So when I need information about a media, I just go and look at it all over the place. When I was doing glass objects at this residency in Yucca Valley, and maybe I'll have some pictures of those or not, there's some in the Fry show, some cast glass. I would just look up glass objects. I would look at glass ashtrays. I would look at every single thing I could find made out of glass. There's not that much interesting glass art, but I would look at that too. So I definitely, and just like I was telling you guys, like find out how it's made and go steal from it. So when I need an etching idea, I go and I look at etchings, like for real. I think that was a long-winded answer to that. I hope I answered it.
Well, you got lots more coming. So LaSalle, you go next, and then we're going to read some off. And then Zoe.
Oh, look at that example right there. I I just
Yourself,
got that.
you can unmute.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was going to say I really love the glass. I saw things in there that I had to question, am I really seeing that or am I not?
Oh, fun.
And you turn your head and look at it a different way, and it was saying a lot. I guess I wanted to ask you, is there a point in as you being an artist that you made commercial decisions on what the outcome was going to happen, based on maybe money or finding yourself in a bigger platform or arena or?
Great question. Did I cut you off or did it get sound? Are we still together? All of us?
We hear you.
Oh, good.
But
Okay, because it got a little bit quiet. I don't think so. I don't think, I'm trying to think, like, really honestly, like, if I got a commission, there haven't been many, but the glass has somehow invited commissions in, which is interesting. And actually, I don't really want to go into that because it's just not that fun. But sometimes you really don't make any money on these commissions. They kind of find ways to kind of mess with you a little bit, which is that they like pay you for the materials, but not your time a lot. And then maybe they'll buy it and maybe they won't. And I've been lucky that they bought it, but otherwise I spent a year working and I didn't get paid for it for some things. So that's not always clear. But the truth is, I'm not a purist for the sake of it. I just don't think I can do it. Look at this stuff. You know what I mean? I just don't think I could make commercially. I don't know what I would make that would be commercially attractive. So not really. And, I did make smaller objects during COVID, which could be more commercially smart thing to do, right? Because they're smaller, but I just did it because I was trading with artists, because I finally had time, right? And it was so incredibly amazing and moving for me to start living with art in a way that I hadn't before, that I was like, oh, I want to make more things that people can live with. And that I just got into this like tenderness, domestic vibe. But you'd think maybe that would be a commercial decision. And guess what? It wasn't. It wasn't. It's more people did not buy them. So I just find that being responsible to that kind of prediction is not my forte, right? That's what your gallery gets 50% for, or it's too weird out there, right? So I think it's better if I just stick to what I'm a little bit better at and kind of let go of what I can't control, which is, do people like it? Like, I don't know. How are you going to know that? But it's a great question. Totally.
I like how you just said, look at this stuff. That's good.
I mean, that's really pretty to me, but is it pretty to everyone? Does it make sense? Are people going to buy that? I don't know.
Good. All right. So Eden has a question. What is your favorite, and this is in quotes, medium to work with? What is a medium you haven't worked with but would like to do a future piece with?
It just depends on my mood. I would normally, like, I've had to do these big glass things that I've shown you, and I don't usually have to do that. Usually I just make sculptures for a show, right? But because of my own idea, right? I had to fill 80 feet worth of glass. And in the middle of that, I don't like it much. It just feels grueling. I would rather work for 5 minutes on this, work for 5 minutes on this, and skip around. It's kind of one thing, though. I bet you guys feel this. Like, when you have a deadline is when you make your best work that's not for the deadline. So I do try to leave myself time for that. So let's say you have to make a huge glass piece, and you're going to play hooky and make a ceramic, because sometimes that's the best thing for a while, because that energy of defiance. I have recently started making needle points. They are so slow. I love them so much. I can't even believe I'm making needle points and showing them in a museum. It's insane, and I love them. I love clay. I miss it now because I haven't been there. And paper mache, I recently went back to it because, because I did this residency at McDowell Colony, and So I had to limit my materials, right? Because I was in a residency in New Hampshire. I don't have kilns. I got to ship stuff. I was so excited to have to limit myself. And I had wanted to make these paper mache drawings for a long time, but they're slow. They're really slow because you're ripping up bits of newspaper and, well, I don't know, everything is slow and fast in a way. I mean, and I just had the best time making these. These are papers usually stapled together. So I'll tell you this, that the shape of the paper is really a big part of it. So just like cutting the paper into form, or like, you know, how this bottom part is smaller, like, and then using the paper mache in this image to connect the two pieces of paper. Like, so actually the size and shape of the structure is like a huge part of how I start these, and in terms of just informing everything, right? So this paper, you know, at the edge of that blue business there, like there's empty space. I think you can see that. This is, the blue is like thick paper mache, not thick. What is it? Maybe an inch at the most, but you know, it has texture. I guess you can tell that, right? That's like the teardrop or thing, and these lines are like fat. The lines are made with paper mache, newspaper, torn up newspaper. So it has like girth. And then it's all kinds of stuff, gouache, watercolor. This is maybe really obvious too. It's like oil pastel, real messy. There's powder pastel on there too, or what we call soft pastel, I guess. This is pencil and pastel. This I also let, if you can tell, like the little bit of green and the little sunset, I let actually part of the newspaper that I was ripping up show through. And that was very exciting to me, actually, because here I am, I'm about to cover everything up because I'm sort of following my own rule that I was covering it up. But then I was like, oh my God, sunset, bit of grass, so much nuance and information and prettiness in that. So I was really pleased to leave that empty. So I think I answered your question, which, like, there isn't really one. If I want to be in bed at home and it's cold in the studio, I want to do needlepoint and listen to an audiobook, and it's heaven. Clay and paper mache are both really satisfying. Glass is so beautiful, so fast. I don't know. I really do like them all, at the risk of sounding corny. That made me want to stand up and show you this. These glass frames that I'm working on. I don't know why I just had to show you this. There's one in the show at the Fry. I don't know, can you see it? It's hard to show glass. This is a glass frame I just made. I think it's so beautiful. So that was just really fun. And then I'm going to put something inside it, right? So then I'm combining these materials, and I don't really know what. This is one that's in progress. It's getting closer. The blue frame is the glass. And then I cut out the piece of wood to fit inside the frame. So the frame gets made first, the wood fits inside. And this is a piece of a drawing I made in McDowell, like all those other ones, that just, I thought it was the best one, and then it just couldn't work. So I ended up cutting it up, ripping it up, and that might end up as part of a bigger drawing in this frame. And that's, you know, this is I guess you can tell, it's like pretty sculptural paper mache. There's the newspaper on the back. It's a paper mache bit, like built on the paper, right? And then I put oil pastel over it. Yes, there's 3 questions, and I think I might as well take them. And I'll show you this letter P.
What is that?
Oh, that's a letter P. Sorry, I was like, I'm not going to show you things too. Actually, you know how I was trying to show you guys that you could put crumpled up kiln paper and make dimension, but I was using that big one. This is so much easier to show. Can you see how this is? It's very simply done. Like you just put paper underneath it, but it's a special paper that doesn't burn. And then you put the glass on top, and it makes these, it gives you this dimension and texture. This is the letter P for the booklet we made for the Fry. The ABCs of Jessica Jackson Hutchins. So that Amanda, the curator, came up with that idea, which was really great.
The manifesto. So Samantha has a question, and then Zoe's going to speak a question, and we end with Tom's if we have time. So Samantha
Great.
asks, and this goes back to the materials stuff. When you're displaying glass on a floor piece, do you use artificial light to light up the pieces, or do you prefer it to be unlit, and why?
Great question. When they're on the floor in the middle of a room, is that what you're saying? Because if they're
It doesn't.
okay, well, because if they're on the floor in the middle of the room, it's amazing. There's so much ambient light that it really works. And I would not, normally I don't even answer things this straightforward, but I would not light that hardly at all because the light's going to be so bossy and an electric light. Like I wouldn't spot it. I would maybe spot it from above, but like gently. It's one of the fun things about starting to work with glass is collaborating with the sun, which is way bossier than you would think. So you think you make this really dense piece of glass and you put it in the sun and it just disappears. Like if the glass is not a really dense color or materiality. So that's pretty fun to have to start considering that when I make things that are in the window. When they're in the room, it's easier. But yes, then you would just be more sensitive to using like deep purple glass against a really transparent pink. You would do it maybe, but it would be really intentional because light is such a big, I don't know. I think I answered that adequately.
Okay, Zoe, will you please speak your question?
Yeah. Hi. I got to see your show at the Fry on my birthday, actually, which felt really special. And I was so enamored by every single piece that I saw there. And the whole time I went with a friend and I kept like turning to her and just saying like, I wish that I could see inside her brain during this process. Like, because your work is so intuitive and it's clear that there's so many of these like very small decisions that end up really mattering a lot. And I also love what you've been talking about today about just like accepting and integrating all of the mistakes and the breaks and the surprises that happen during the creative process. And it's made me wonder, like, do you have any kind of regular creative practices, like things that you do every day or every week, or ways that you like to experiment with things?
I don't have anything very regular. And it's sort of, I could feel the longing when you said that. I wish. I think I have, whatever my neuroatypicality is, it's really hard for me to plan and structure. And so I think my work looks the way it does because my brain works the way it does. I mean, I guess that's obvious, but what the maturity was learning not to fight it, because you think some artists are like, I draw every day. And I'm like, I should draw every day. But I don't draw every day. I flow. And that is what I learned, is to not fight the way that I work, and when I would fight it, and I would, because I thought that's how you should work, which might be finish something before you start another one, or don't start 30,000 things, or don't jump from one material to the other constantly, or when I stopped fighting that's how I worked, and that's not how everybody works. I'm not saying you have to work that way. It just got so much better, everything, and the biggest one was maybe feeling like I had to know what or why I was doing it before I did it, or even after it was done, for crying out loud. Often things are, after they're done, they sit around forever before I know that they're good. And this is a great one. Let's look at this one. This is in the Fry show too. So I made this shape, and this is a clay shape. I love relief. That's a flat thing with like a sculptural thing coming off of it, as I've shown you. Relief in glass. I love relief. So all this was meant to be a tray. Tray, is that what you call it? I've made a few of these that go right into the wall, and they they sit like a shelf. I'm sorry, a shelf. It was meant to be like a shelf where I might even put things. And I've made some shelves and I love them. They're cool. And I have ceramics that are built out of them and I put ceramics on top of them. And I might even put like a LaCroix on it and you can put your keys on it, maybe. I don't know. But I ended up with this shape, this sort of butt shape that's not quite a butt shape. And it resonated. I thought it was beautiful. So I wanted it on the wall. So there's already a total pivot from what it set out to be. And all my work is like that. I just total pivot right there. And then I tried this glaze, that insane blue glaze with the yellow dots. I do not know why I got so carried away with that. And I covered it with that. And then I was totally alienated from the thing for 2 years. It just sat there. I thought it was the ugliest glaze. I just didn't know what to do with it. And then years later, I don't know, I wanted to get it off the table. So I poured all kinds of other colors on it. I melted bits of glass. I melted bits of rock. I just poured all kinds of stuff on it, including found ceramics. I was really into that. Like I just have this stuff that I buy at thrift stores that I hope will melt into the piece like this, for instance. So there you can see those little flowers. That was like a swan. I put that on, I put it back in the kiln. Well, the swan didn't melt the way I wanted the swan to melt. So then I sat around another 6 months until I broke it. I broke the swan. So we just had the flower because it was such a declaration of swan. I just didn't need that. So that is the workings of my mind. It's like looking at the thing and asking it what it needs and why, and then being surprised at what it tells me enough to respond to that. You know what I mean?
I think that is a good way because it's 1 o'clock. So I think you were really so helpful for everyone, like we really hit on a lot of topics and I like the format. And Tom,
Good.
we're not going to be able to get to, but just for everyone to wonder about, which is you mentioned human and comfort often. So on the back of what Professor Kathleen Amon asked about art history and artists, that was the question that we're going to leave with. Maybe you could.
Okay.
I'll pass it on. But thank you. That was really beautiful and helpful, and good luck with your move and your job teaching. You did great.
Thank you. Thanks, you
You have
guys.
a lot to offer.
I really liked being with you, and thanks for just participating. Awesome.
Great. Bye.